Howdy folks, BC here. You're watching Deuce and Guns, and today I'm going to show you the cheap but slow way to turn 5.56 brass that I shot through Vera into 300 blackout brass that I can shoot through Black Betty. And here's a list of items you're going to need to make your 300 blackout brass the cheapest way possible. Unfortunately, it also ends up being the slowest way possible. Number one, you're going to need a cheap and or free source of 223 or 5.56 brass. I picked this stuff up at the range for free because people just shoot it and leave it. You're going to need a set of calipers. Every reloader needs a set of calipers. You're going to need a hacksaw with a blade designed to cut metal. You're going to need a bench vise of some sort. This is pretty heavy duty. You don't need something this big, but you do need something big enough to hold on to that piece of brass while you're cutting it. You're going to need a single stage press. I use the Lee Classic press that has the breech loader option on it, so it speeds things up just a little bit, and they're not that expensive. You're going to need the Lee trimmer. It's the cheapest way to trim brass, and you're going to need a deburring and chamfering tool. You're also going to need a set of 300 blackout dies of your choice. I use Lee, they are the cheapest, but Lee is kind of going up in price suddenly for some reason. You're going to need an old school Sharpie, and you're going to really be working this brass a lot. You're going to need some sort of case lube. Now let's get started. Okay, step one is to grab a random piece of brass, chuck it into your bench vise, and mark it for cutting. That's where your Sharpie comes into play. And what you're going to do is just use a standard fine point Sharpie. You're going to mark it right underneath where the shoulder hits the main body of the case. Now you're going to take your hacksaw and you're going to basically bisect that line right there. You want to go right down the center of that line, so then half of it remains on the case and half of it remains on the part you're going to cut off. And you want to keep that as flat and even as possible as you get it started. Easier said than done. Once you get that groove cut though, you're golden. There we go. And as you can see, I left a little bit of line right there because that's going to be about the trim length we need for this piece of brass. And now let's take it out of there. It may be warm. Actually, this one is. As you can see, it's kind of ugly on the inside. We're going to have to clean that up a little bit with the deburring and chamfering tool right now. You don't have to do this, but it's much easier on your expensive set of dies if you do. And just for comparison, here is what we just cut off to make our 300 blackout brass, and here's its parent case, the 223. Now, we're going to be working this brass quite a bit, so here's a time to go ahead and lube it up a little bit. You can use whatever case lube you want, but please use some case lube. It will be really hard on this die if you don't. And now you may have to feed it in a little bit to make sure. Now that went right in. Okay, and here we go. Go slow, but you should be able to make it with one pass. And now we bring it back down. And there we have it. The primer has been pushed out and it has a neck on it. So now let's take out a random piece of 223 again and show you the newly formed piece of untrimmed 300 blackout brass right next to its parent case. And the cheapest way to trim up brass is basically to chuck it into this Lee Shellholder. And you want to use one of the Lee cutters here. Cheapest way possible. There are many other ways to trim brass. This is the cheapest one I found, and it basically just goes in there and you turn it till it's actually trimmed up. And now once you're done trimming, you're going to have this flat section here that still needs to be, again, deburred and chamfered. So, make sure and just basically round off the inside and make sure it's not a big flat edge there to help facilitate reloading and for chambering into your rifle. Now that piece of brass is ready to go. Go ahead and check out its dimensions. And once we go ahead and measure up the 300 blackout case we just made on our calipers, you'll see that it comes out at 1.360, which is just a shade under the maximum amount of case length you can have, which is 1.368. So right on the money, ready to be reloaded. And if you think you might be able to get by with not trimming the case before you try to resize it, here is the actual 300 blackout case we just made. Here's what happens if you try to shove the 223 case in there just a little ways. You're going to bell it out, and if you keep on forcing it, you're going to break it off and force it into the inside there. You can kind of see it right there where the inside rim right there you see is actually the top part folded in on itself and then broken off. This case is useless. This case I can salvage, but this case is completely useless now. And now remember, you've taken a piece of 223 or 5.56 brass and made a completely different size and type of brass out of it. So before you start putting bullets and powder in these things, you got to make sure that it fits your chamber. So you grab your intended firearm. Of course, you should have the chamber flag in there. You drop that out, lock the bolt back, because 90% of you is going to be using this for an AR style 300 blackout, and you want to take the actual case and just kind of stick it in the chamber. There we go, and let the bolt slide home. Now, you should not have any trouble getting that piece of brass out of there. So start pulling back slowly, just ever so slowly, and the brass just comes right out like that did, squeaky clean, no issues. Then you're good to go. Now, if you have any trouble getting that brass out of that chamber, you're going to need to invest in a small base die to make sure that the piece of brass is sized down well enough to easily chamber. Because the last thing you want to do is have a piece of brass that's too tight for your chamber and keeps that bolt from going all the way home and locking all the way in. Because you do not want to be pulling that trigger if the bolt is not fully seated forward. Because the gun will go off. And if the bolt's not locked forward, then it's going to be a bad day for you, a bad day for your rifle, and a bad day for anybody else at the range. And if you have any comments or questions about today's episode, go ahead and leave them in the comment box below the video. And if you like today's episode, go ahead and give me a like and subscribe, because I have a lot more of this on the way, including a how to make 300 blackout brass expensive but very, very quickly. In that episode, probably come out in a couple weeks or so, I will be showing you how I use my CH4D forming die along with all kinds of tools and toys I've collected over the years. As always, you guys have a great day. See ya.